Welcome to the virtual Women in Gender and International Development discussion series. This is our third and final event for fall 2024, and we're happy that you could all join us virtually today for the discussion featuring Dr. Kalpanagiri as guest speaker. As of this morning, we had 79 people registered for today's event. So besides lots of students, faculty, and staff from Virginia Tech that include people from many different countries, we have folks joining us from other U.S. universities, UT Austin, Princeton University, and other universities across the world, including Carleton in Canada and Vinh University in Vietnam. And we have several universities in the U.S., including the Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture, USAID, and then we have World Resources Institute, Forest Action Nepal, Institute of Forestry Nepal, and more. Folks from Nepal, Great Britain, Vietnam, Uganda, and Canada. So, and maybe more this morning that I didn't get. So welcome to all of you. So please note that our event will be recorded and available on our website later. So for all participants, by staying on now, you're consenting to being recorded. You can turn your camera off if you don't want your image to be recorded. So before introducing our speaker, I invite you to reflect on Virginia Tech's land and labor recognition. I will read you a summary of that, but actually is going to put the link to the full statement on the Virginia Tech website. So Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo-Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their land and waterways. We further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act in 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in California and other areas in the West. We also recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through inclusivity, the institutional and individual commitment to ut prosum, that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Okay, some brief housekeeping notes. This event will last approximately 45 minutes. Our speaker's presentation will be about 25 minutes, followed by about 20 of discussion and Q&A with the audience. So all participants will be muted to enable the speaker to present without interruption. As always, in order for our discussion to be as rich as it can be, we need everyone to be respectful and treat all participants with kindness and consideration without discriminatory behavior. So if anyone is disrespectful, including interrupting the speaker or bringing in off-topic issues, we will have to remove them from the Zoom meeting. You can post your questions at any time during this discussion in the chat box. And we will read those after our presentation, or you can actually raise your hand and ask to read your question yourself. But we do want to maintain order. And oh, I see this meeting is being transcribed. So, okay. Thank you for whoever's doing that for letting us know. So anyway, after the speaker's presentation, you can raise your hands through the virtual buttons, and Pratyuksha will tell you how to do that then. And we'll ask you to unmute yourself to talk directly. So this is called a discussion series. It's not just a lecture. So we really encourage people to communicate verbally as well as in writing. But if you're shy, I'm happy to read it for you. Or if your internet connection is not good, sometimes that's the reason that I will read them for you. So again, the webinar is being recorded. So that also means you'll have access to it later via our website. Now, if you'd like to enable captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can find the option More, select it, and then select Show Captions, and then select English.
I don't see you.
So,
and enjoy.
Noriko, can you mute yourself, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So in advance, I'd like you at the end when Pratyuksha puts the link in for the survey, please do fill out the survey. It really helps. And it also be emailed to you. It really helps us to get feedback for planning and funding. Okay, now I know what you really want us to hear, Kalpanagiri, so let me introduce her. She is a senior manager in the World Resources Institute and works to expand WRI's ambitions on social equity by research and gender and equity integrated programming. Kalpana is a trained forester and has demonstrated experience in mainstreaming gender and social equity considerations in technical sectors, programming with a focus on forestry, clean energy, RED+, climate adaptation, and FLEGT and restoration topics. Prior to joining WRI, she worked with RECOFTC. You're going to have to tell us what that is, Kalpana, where she managed the direction and portfolio of equity integration. She designed and implemented a regional WAVES leadership program in partnership with sectoral ministries, private sector, women, and indigenous groups to promote transformative solutions for the environment and people across forestry and climate change policies and plans. She's a thought leader on topics of gender and social equity in forestry and climate change, and advises several international organizations to strengthen their gender strategies and portfolio. So Kalpana holds a PhD in forest science from the University of Natural Resources and Applied Life Sciences in Vienna, in Austria. Her direct experience of working with diverse stakeholders, including marginalized actors, have made her more aware of the acute need and usefulness of plural knowledge systems held by marginalized actors in addressing major environmental issues. Drawing on insights from the Global Restoration Initiative led by World Resources Institute, today she will shed light on ways in which gender and social equity approaches are implemented in restoration practice and discuss its implications for navigating the complex interplay of restoration, climate change, and social justice through development practice. So the title of her talk is Beyond the Critiques and Ambitions of Equity Mainstreaming in Restoration Practice, Lessons from the Global Restoration Initiative. Now I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to share my screen. So Kalpana, you'll have to just tell me next, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Maria Elisa Christie. Hello, everyone. Namaste. I'm very pleased to be in this space. Once again, thanks to Maria Elisa Christie for inviting me to this space, and also to Virginia Tech University for holding this space. Today, I'll be sharing some insights of doing equity in restoration practice within the nexus of climate change. But before I do that, I would also like to share some context so you understand where my knowledge and insights are coming from. Next, please. Next slide. So I think I'm drawing my insights from my lived experience, as a university trained forester, as well as through my work experience. I'm trained as a forest engineer, and forestry is my major degree. However, I started to observe some disconnect between the forest curricula and the practice, and that made me curious to learn more. So I ended up reading, learning, and more and more I connected to the right networks and mentors that talked about sociology of forests. And eventually I ended up doing a PhD in forestry. For my PhD, I examined the topics of forest governance from a wider lens, wider sociological lens that also included gender and governance perspective. So this combined knowledge of technical and social sciences has really helped me tremendously. First, I think it really expanded my abilities to better understand environmental problems and create impactful solutions that really work for the people on the ground. Second, I also think that this knowledge also expanded my abilities, and it also expanded better and more job choices for me. And last but not least, it really gave me a choice to choose the type of organization and the type of work that I really want to engage, because I want my work to be meaningful and create some impacts. And so having those abilities really puts me in a space where I'm choosing the jobs and the organization that I want to work with. And that's really a privilege. So today I will share some of these practical examples of how equity mainstreaming or gender and social equity mainstreaming actually is done in practice. And to do that, I'll give a snapshot of my current work at the World Resource Institute. Next slide. So I think for many of you, if you don't know World Resource Institute, or in short, WRI, It's a nonprofit organization that tackles global environmental issues affecting nature, people, and the climate. It works on multiple different environmental topics ranging from land, food, water, ocean, and cities. Forest and land degradation and deforestation is one key topic. Within WRI, I'm part of an initiative that is called Global Restoration Initiative. This initiative aims to restore millions of hectares of deforested and degraded land across 3 geographies globally, in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It works with 52 countries and in partnership with almost 500 partners on the ground, including government, business, and communities around the world. I lead and manage the equity integration work of Global Restoration Initiative. Just to add a bit of context here on what restoration really implies, restoration efforts are extremely essential to the global efforts of reversing land degradation and climate change. It is important also to ensure that people who actually heavily depend on these resources are also not left behind, and they improve their resilience through the efforts that we put through restoration. And restoration is often used as an umbrella term that revolves around land degradation, but it involves a lot of technical interventions such as agroforestry, reforestation, silvopasture, water management, assisted natural regeneration, tree planting, and so on and so forth, right? So for some of you who are really focusing on forestry as a major, I think know that a bunch of different interventions are actually clubbed under restoration as a potential major of interventions. Restoration is also chosen because it offers the potential to deliver solutions that are on ground, that are also cost effective, and that are multiple in nature. Multiple in the sense that it can generate environmental, social, and economical solutions. As such, there is an increasing commitment, pledges, and ambitions being set to implement restoration solutions. Initiatives like Afro100, which stands for the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, and the 2020 initiative are an example of that. Both Afro100 and 2020 initiatives are country-led efforts, but they aim to implement 100 million hectares of land in Africa under restoration by 2030, and 50 million hectares of degraded land into conservation and restoration in Latin America and Caribbean. Next. And I think despite these pledges and ambition, we also need to understand that the progress is slow. And there are certain critics that surround whether restoration is really equitable or not. If you really look around the literature and condense the major patterns that are coming out of the studies shows 2 distinct patterns. First, inequities are scalar to restoration. And that means that they persist across all levels of restoration, whether it's at the agenda setting level, to implementation, to including different plural knowledge systems, or representing different needs and priorities of different actors, also the marginalized communities. Second, despite the call for reforms on equity implementation, the dominant practice or the dominant ways through which gender and social equity mainstreaming is usually applied across environmental organizations, including in climate change practice, has highly remained problematic. They show a trend where equity aspects remain highly superficial, often done just to tick the box and to match the funding request. But by doing so, they often create a space where equity aspects are depoliticized, they become devalued, and remain inadequately accounted within project designs and outcomes. And this really leads to limited outcomes for social change. So if we really combine these 2 patterns, then it really looks like a very serious issue, right? And what can we really do around that? The question then becomes, how can we really do equity implementation right in restoration programs? And what would enable that? So today, I really invite you to learn, discuss, and consider how we can do that. I would like to share with you 2 examples from the Global Restoration Initiative, where I and a lot of champions from my team engaged in this process and supported equity implementation within those 2 programs. The first program, the first example is about Terra Fund for Afro100 program. Next slide, please. So Terra Fund for Afro100 program is basically, Terra Fund is a fund, it's a blended finance fund It aims to incentivize restoration on the ground through finance, data, and partnerships. It supports implementation of restoration solutions across Africa, including in 3 key landscapes: the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, Lake Kivu, and the Rufiji Basin, and the Ghana Cocoa Belt. WRI's role in this space is that WRI co-creates the design and delivery with the partners through a platform called TerraMatch. It offers funding, data, platform, policy, and equity support to the partners to implement restoration. Next, please. Next slide. So TerraFund is basically a blended finance fund. And why TerraFund was important is because some of the money, the traditional pocket of money or funding that goes into restoration and climate change, it is very less and limited. A lot of dependency on bilats alone will actually create a dependency syndrome of countries always looking out for money. So can the money be used in a way that it can really incentivize the economy that is based on restoration on the ground? And that was the vision that TerraFund took. And in order to do that, it really wants to mobilize private finance to support restoration economies on the ground. And it wants to do it in a way that it remains locally relevant, equitable, and that it provides secure jobs and livelihoods to the communities who actually do restoration on the ground. And to do that, for now, what it does is that it provides targeted funding, direct funding to profit and nonprofit organizations that undertake restoration projects in Africa. And these restoration projects grow trees, restore land, and generate social impacts. The demand for this program is huge. We have received, we launched this program since September 2021. And until now, we have received almost more than 3,000 applications, and we're able to fund only 198 projects in 27 countries in Africa. And we have disbursed 32 million to support restoration implementation on the ground. Next. So how does equity really come into integration within a fund like TerraFund? So the process of equity integration or implementation in TerraFund really began with, I think, me working with the team, understanding the nature of their program, what the program really wants to deliver, and then bringing some of my social skills to conduct the social, gender, and social data analysis and finding some really key gaps and priorities, and then throwing that back to the bigger team for discussion and deliberation. Here, in addition to the data sharing and deliberation, what really happened is I think I was also able to translate some of the equity data and concepts around gender and social equity, gender gaps, rights, and power dynamics within the concept of running a fund. What does that really look like to the fund in very simple terms? In simple terms, the equity efforts were really placed in 2 areas. The first area is at the funding level, because TerraFund is essentially a fund. It disburses the fund. So the first step is to really examine whether or not TerraFund is able to disburse its funding to the groups that actually face more constrained barriers to access funding. So when we did that research, we find that especially women-led and youth-led enterprises often face much more constrained barriers to access funding. Therefore, we prioritize them in our funding allocations. Second, restoration ultimately wants to incentivize local economies, local jobs, and livelihoods at the ground. And therefore, it is important that we really position people as a key element within restoration practice. This means that restoration projects generate benefits such as jobs, livelihoods, trainings, networks, and more. And that these benefits also go and reach to disadvantaged groups within those communities at the local level, such as to smallholder farmers, women, youth, indigenous communities, and so on and so forth. So with these ideas, we solidified these goals. We really created some specific equity criteria into the vetting criteria. We evaluated project application based on those vetting criteria. We selected a diverse team of local and global experts with diverse expertise who can evaluate the proposal so that the evaluation scores remains fair and balanced. And then we also equipped TerraFund's data and monitoring system through TerraMatch so that we can capture disaggregated information, analyze that over time, and make timely improvements on where the gains are being made and what needs to be improved within our team and strategies. Next, please. So if we really look at the early results, the early results actually show that TerraFund delivers results, both environmental, social, and financial results. Over 50% of the TerraFund funding were supported women and youth-led organizations, and it created significant land restoration, jobs, and livelihoods at scale. So this is huge. This is equity at scale kind of result that is delivered by TerraFund. And one of the interesting innovation that happened here is that while we evaluated project applications through the vetting criteria and conducted some interviews to understand different type of power dynamics and engagement model they use, what really came out interestingly is to realize that there are already some organizations in Africa that are very serious about gender and social equity. They were very innovative in terms of crafting their engagement model to reach out to, local farmers, poor farmers, pastoralists. And then some of the businesses really had their business proposition model built in a way that more than 80% of their businesses are catering to women, right? So women ended up getting jobs, youth ended getting jobs. So there's a lot of potential and untapped opportunity that exists around these projects, which we have not analyzed yet, right? And that's what we really want to do moving forward. So from TerraFund in Africa, now let's move to the 2020 initiative that focuses in Latin America and the Caribbean. This initiative, the Initiative 2020, is a regional partnership that aims to bring more than 50 million hectares of degraded land into conservation and restoration by 2030. Within Latin America and the Caribbean, FOLU, or agriculture, forestry, and land use sectors, is a key sector in the region that is set to achieve climate targets of adaptation, mitigation, land degradation, and restoration. And in this role, in this space, WRI serves as the secretariat of the 2020 initiative and provides engagement, convening, technical support, and also provides support to mobilize funding. Next. The nature of 2020 initiative is a bit different than the TerraFund because TerraFund is a fund, 2020 is a platform. So for 2020 initiative, engagement and partnership is key element to its design and delivery. It deliberately aims to ensure diversity of partnerships to create an inclusive engagement process. As a matter of fact, part of the success of this initiative is measured by the members of the community and how they feel about the whole engagement process. Till date, the initiative engaged with 18 countries, 136 technical partners, 32 financial partners, and it has very dedicated task force on technical topics such as biodiversity, assisted natural regeneration, carbon markets and investment ecosystem, monitoring, policy and incentives, and so on and so forth. Here, WRI role is that WRI facilitates this space, is the secretariat, and as such, equity became a criterion that could be really important to club within the stakeholder engagement processes. Next, please. More specifically, how equity is brought into 2020 is through this 4 elements. First, we really identify diverse partners that with very different type of experience to participate in this initiative. And these partners really share and play a decisive co-creative role in how restoration agendas are set and implemented. So this is a central element of sharing the power of decision-making with the partners that really makes it equitable. Second, I think problems are really identified from the ground and then they are brought through to this platform. And then WRI also supported partners in terms of data-driven research and collaboration so that some key emerging priorities are kind of validated through data and collaborative processes on the ground. We are also in discussion to design and establish a dedicated task group that is going to focus on equity, mainly on gender and social equity aspects of restoration. And this is done because we realize that while a lot has been done through the engagement processes, I think if we really center the gender and social equity as one dedicated pillar element, it will really give them the visibility and the privilege of being positioned as a central element, and it will be easier to run the discussions around that. Fourth was, I think the initiative creates regular knowledge exchanges among partners. So it treats the partners as people who have knowledges, good knowledges to share with the wider group. So this knowledge exchange also creates a loop of learning and positive influence among different partners. And because partners choose on-ground issues and solutions through collaborative processes, most of those solutions include both technical and social results. Next, please. Next slide. So if we really look into the early results, again, with the 2020, this shows impressive results. 2020 has supported 17.5 million hectares of restored land in Latin America and Caribbean. It also had led to multiple impressive social results. The social results here, the social results here are in terms of knowledge transfer through community of practice, which is really key. It also accelerated some of the funding through the platform. It also enabled some of the strategic planning and helped many different countries in preparation to their national restoration plan that includes measures to increase positive social impacts as well. But if I really look at it as a equity person from far, I really feel that within 2020 initiative, there's a strong sense of ownership and engagement and deliberation of partners that is very unique to the initiative itself. And I see that as a reflection of the success of an equitable engagement process that is plugged within how 2020 is designed, governed, and run. Next, please. Next slide. So what do we really make out of both this example, right? Like we can look at these examples from very different angle, but for today's session, where I really want to bring you is that I really wanted you to see that equity integration in both Terrafund and 2020 initiative give us different important takeaways. I think one of the most important takeaway for me, and I think I want to leave that to you as well, is that equity implementation or mainstreaming, when it's done right, it can yield significant social, environmental, financial impacts that matter to people, that matter to climate, that matter to nature. It's a win-win strategy because it helps to innovate projects design, create inclusive engagement spaces, mitigate gender and social gaps, and achieve social results that really matter to the people who really need these benefits and opportunities. Second, I also think that mixed knowledge of technical and social sciences is hugely helpful for equity implementation because it creates shared understanding, trust, and openness among the team, which is sometimes very helpful to navigate disagreements, to navigate tension points, and to find out the reason of why other person is not really moving forward with one idea, right? Sometimes that's not plain resistance. Sometimes it's like the person is not really familiar with what this process really entails in terms of actual actions and activities and why that is important for this project. This knowledge, I would say, is also very useful to identify champions, both within the team and outside the team. Why that is important is because I think the mixed knowledge really puts you in a space where you can see where the other person is coming from, right? Either the person is a trend forester, what is really important to that person, why that person is analyzing certain issues in that way. And also from the social science perspective, sometimes you really feel that why the right issues are so important to bring into this discussion. And if that doesn't happen to the extent that social scientists always want, why that also creates a sense of frustration with the pace and the quality of integration. So for me, I always find that this knowledge has been hugely helpful for me to bridge, bond, and engage with the right champions. And without champions, we cannot really move it forward. And also, I think along with this, I would like to leave a message that whenever we are thinking about like climate change solutions or environmental issues, please always think them as a holistic solutions. No, we need holistic solutions. We don't need technical solution or social solution or financial solution. We need all the three integrated. And there, I think the knowledge needs to come through is integrated, and solutions needs to come through is integrated as well. What really helped in this process to me is some enablers, apart from the knowledge and the team and champions, is that having budget does help, because at the end of the time, we are trying to move projects on the ground. So resource is a huge, huge enabler. And then champions are hugely useful. Without champions, we cannot really move it forward. Some barriers that I experience in this process is that sometimes we speak very different languages and use very different type of terms. So it takes a lot of time and effort to understand that though we use different terms, we are basically meaning the same things. But most of the people really don't want to move forward beyond the terminologies. They don't want to talk about substance. And so how do we really cultivate that kind of language bridge? That always remains a challenge. Someone really has to pick that conversation, be that conversation maker. And that takes a lot of time and effort, which is always unseen and unaccounted for. It also requires a lot of patience and perseverance, because people are coming from very different technical paradigm of what restoration is and should be. And sometimes on a very subconscious level, I think our forestry degrees sometimes can also make us very egoistical and blind to understand what is actually happening and needed in the field. And examining yourself on a very personal level it does feel vulnerable, right? And so I think it requires a lot of patience and time for people to kind of allow that space and for them to build some understanding around that. And because equity implementation always is about discussion and deliberation and decision making, sometimes if there are not spaces that allow equitable decision making and sharing of power even within team members, then that means one aspect might get weighted more than the other, and that's another challenge. So I think I want to move forward and really bring this back to the audience that I'm speaking with you today. So how can we really think through these learning points and some of the enablers and barriers, right? If I were a forest student, like some of you are 15 years ago, like I was a forest student like you, what would I say? Next slide, please. I would really encourage all the students that, forestry degree is a STEM degree. You might have your own inclinations and aspirations of why you chose to study forestry. So be proud of that identity, build on the forestry knowledge, right? But then don't hold yourself limited by it. Be open and curious to also understand multiple scientific perspectives, right? So I think being openness and curious is key here, especially if you're a student and you are engaging in this space. Second, if you ever get a chance to learn directly from a local community, consider that your golden opportunity, right? Because if you just go and talk to a community member, either with the forest dependent community or indigenous people, and the way they associate forest and natural resources, and the way we learn about forests and natural resources in university, there's a huge divide. But learning both will really make you wise, right? And so I think please consider that as a golden opportunity, seek for those opportunities. The third thing I would always say is that ground your views on real world conditions. And this is extremely important, right? I think my curiosity began when I started to notice that on-ground conditions of forest practice in Nepal did not really match some of the curricula that was being given to me through the forest universities, and I became curious. But at the end of the day, if you really wanted your knowledge to be contributing to the field of praxis, simple logic is that it needs to be relevant to the real world conditions, right? And so ground your views in the real world condition and think, how can forestry knowledge and practice can help me to deliver and to address those real world issues and condition. And in that process, please be open for relearning. That's extremely important, and growth. Also I think embracing some level of openness, adaptability, and respect to diverse views, knowledges, and people is extremely important. This especially is important because I think in some universities and contexts, forestry or STEM degree is seen as kind of a little bit, like degree that require more intellect, or that is considered a little bit of a more hierarchy compared to other topics, such as in social sciences. And I get to hear that personally from a lot of my forester friends that, oh, now you become a social scientist. You are not anymore a forester, for example, right? So I think let's not reach there. That's a very limited field to be in. So please resist that subconscious tendency to be encumbered by the burdens, limit, or ego of your science knowledge paradigm. And don't be encumbered, right? Carry it with you, but then be open to make it wider. This is my message to the forest students and to forest faculty and academia, or to the alma mater. I would like to say some of these points as well. Next slide, please. I would also see that forest universities like Virginia Tech can also play a huge important role around here. And this can take shape in many different forms. For example, universities can really diversify and teach curricula that reflects the on-ground situation and needs of forestry practice on the ground. This can be done in different ways. I think you can curate inclusive spaces of belonging, representation, and voices of diverse genders and actors. Me, in being invited into this space, is one example of that. You can also foster action research with mixed methods and knowledge exchanges, because that's extremely important that we foster that type of critical inquiry that comes from field of practice and comes through different type of knowledge systems, so the students are equipped to embrace that kind of knowledge and see the value around it. And I think if we can also do something that would really help the students to do critical inquiry, but with self-reflexivity and power sharing, that is hugely helpful. I'm saying this because I think as a forester, I always felt that forest fraternity is mostly in many countries implementing is paramilitary, and most of the foresters really hold that power to themselves, that, oh, they are the ones who are going to manage the forest, and all the people that don't listen to them are kind of outsiders and they need to be treated with penalty and as such. And I think that really reflects on where that kind of connotation came from. Most of those connotations came from early forestry universities that really focused on traditional conservation, a little bit of neo-colonialistic Western models of what forestry is and how forests should be managed. But then forest practice has evolved since then. We have learned a lot about community forests, indigenous peoples' ways of looking at forests, how that are also very useful ways of managing the forest and forest resources. But we have not really incultivated the virtue of self-reflexivity within foresters. And this is something that universities really need to think through. I find foresters who are excellent technical experts, but they lack zero empathy and zero social skills. And I don't think, the job market really needs that type of people. So I think in order to, mitigate that gap, we really need to think about cultivating those kind of aptitude skills as well. And last but not least, and so this is a difficult one, because I feel like whenever we think about alma mater, back to all the first universities that I went to, I really wish they have taught me forestry in a very wider and holistic ways. What I really mean to say here is that I think forestry curriculum is still very traditional. It has not expanded to the extent it should have expanded. And that's kind of a disservice, because we already know that there are so many useful mechanisms, local indigenous practice around forestry that exist. So how do we bring those back within this creative thinking and curriculum making process and redefine and pluralize forest science? And I think that's really important, because if we really want to tackle the urgency of climate change, environmental crisis, we cannot do with a science or a knowledge system which is very sectoral and which is very narrow and which is far from meeting the needs on the ground. So with that, next slide, please. I want to thank you, and I also want to thank some of my team members from the World Resource Institute, especially from the Global Restoration Initiative, namely Rene Zamora, who leads the 2020 initiative, Will Anderson, who leads the F400 initiative, and Sean David, who manages the Global Restoration Initiative. This is a collective effort, and so thank you. And again, thank you to Maria Elisa Christie and the university for having me. Thank you. Over to you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, wow. Thank you, Kalpana. That was great. It's very exciting to see, you know, it was like 15 years ago that you and I started working on gender and forestry in Nepal. So it's really exciting to see that you're now working with WRI and all the different things that you're doing. And thank you for so many messages to our students and faculty here at Virginia Tech, as well as everybody else on the thing. I want to say there was an oversight. I forgot to say at the beginning. It's very important, and I don't know if but actually you put it into the chat. But this talk is also, it's being co-hosted by Diverse Voices and Perspectives lecture series. So that's very important. And because we are also part of International Education Week, which is not only here at Virginia Tech, but so hopefully that brought some audience to our thing today that wouldn't have heard about it otherwise. So, okay, so now we have time for questions. So if I didn't see very many in the questions, but if you want to raise your hand, then I can call on you. You want to make a comment or have a question? That is how we would proceed now. Okay, I see. Yes, I see a question. Okay, let's see. Am I still unmute? Yes. Okay, from Bonnie Zare. And Bonnie's our director here at Virginia Tech, our director of Women's and Gender and Sexuality Studies. Bonnie, are you wanting to speak yourself? Do you want me to read this?
I'd be happy to read it. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for being here. I was wondering to what degree you feel you're directly taking on capitalist policy as you do this work. Do you see your work, and then part two, do you see your work fitting into a transnational feminist perspective where you're working across borders and keeping the excesses of hyper-capitalist policies in mind? Or do you see it more as third world feminism where you're looking more at the local context and listening to the people and using that as sort of the springboard?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's a very difficult question, but thanks for asking. I think to begin with, what I would really like to say is that I am a strong believer of justice and rights. I consider myself a huge feminist, right? And I do call out issues when I see some wrongdoings around that. But also, I think I would need to reflect that I work in a development practice, which is highly based on institutions and structures that is neocolonialistic in nature, right? And so, and third is whenever you are working with topics like restoration, you are engaging with local communities. And that really brings me into this blended spaces where I think the utility of one principle doesn't hold value. What really holds value is knowing what is the need of the local communities. Where do they really want themselves see going, right? And if they really need jobs and livelihood and they wanted more local economies coming out of restoration, do we really think that is a translation of neoliberal or neo-capitalistic model? Or do you rather think that is something that local people really want and that they really want it to move their life forward, right? And I think these questions, therefore, also needs to be thought from the practical perspective of how do we bring it on the ground? What are we really seeing it? And it's a gray area. I would totally admit that sometimes it might feel that, oh, maybe it's a very heavy model, right? But we have been very conscious and intentional in our efforts in Global Restoration Initiative to not simply borrow that idea, but really engage the local actors and communities to understand what they are coming from, what kind of modality might be the best modality to work around that. One way we do that is we do not really fund large-scale restoration, right? Like large companies going there and just engaging communities as extractive laborers. We don't do that. We rather made a decision to fund a small organization that do quality type of work on restoration, but do generate some markets and money, because that is also essential to create jobs and give back to the communities. So this is, I would say, I do not see those areas as very divergent, because of this experience now. Before I was like, no, I don't want to engage in that space. But now I feel that in the practice, right, conceptually, there are huge divides between finance and equity. Like the science doesn't even meet. But then in practice, you realize that they actually come together. And I think that's how I would like to really frame it.
Any more questions or comments? I saw that Bonnie also put in the chat, please be open for relearning is a great message. And so in that light, also, I want to stress, I made a note of something about, you said how, different paradigms require patience. As I work in a multidisciplinary environment, and Virginia Tech is doing work in restoration, and it is, different experts from very different fields. So the idea that you need patience and also respect for each other in this kind of hierarchical thing is really important. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think on that, I really wanted to say that patience. I think before, if you really met me 10 years before, I think I would really get angry on those kind of interfaces. I did not really have the skills yet developed on how do you actually navigate through that. So I would also say that that's a huge skill set that would develop as a person working on transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary teams. And that requires effort. It doesn't just come by, right? Like, I think you go through the process, you reflect on it. For me, what really helped is, I think the mix of knowledge has always helped me, because if, let's say, forest ministers say that, oh, I really don't understand why they are always talking about human rights. I really don't get, like, we are doing forest protection and local communities engagement. What more do they want? Then I know that for this person, forest protection is the main area that they're concerned about, right? They don't really can even bring them to think about human rights. They're like, human rights should be done by someone else, not by forestry ministries, right? So that's the level of thinking and space that they're operating from. And so when you know that, you cannot be angry with them anymore. Rather, you would say, okay, here we are using different terms, but where does the connection actually comes close to both sides of the world, right? So sometimes I feel that kind of translation of perhaps not simplifying the bigger concepts of equity, human rights, feminism within some simple terms that sound digestible to the other sector might be helpful to open up conversation. Yeah, but sometimes I also feel that the challenge is there. Sometimes you also feel that you are hitting the wall. There's no, like windows out there to open up. And at times you feel that you are not with the right people and right team to even initiate those conversations. Yeah.
We have several comments in the chat. I hope people are reading the chat. They're not questions, so I'm not going to read them, but please feel free to keep putting your comments in the chat. I want to say, since we're coming to the end, I do want to say, I think Pratidaksha has already put the link for the survey, and we'll also send it when this is over. But I want to let you know that we have a great lineup also for the spring, including presentations on India as a megacity, on Colombia, and in April, a final presentation looking at the Andes and Appalachia from a food geography perspective. So when you do the survey, you have the option to sign on to our WGD listserv, and then you will get the information about that. Or you can just come back and look at our website. But our next event won't be till February. So if we don't have more questions, I'm gonna, Kalpana, is there anything, I actually thought of this in our last speaker, and it's the first time I've thought of it, but I want to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to say that wasn't crammed into your 25 minute presentation?
Not so much on the content, but I think I just wanted to leave a message back to the team and to you, Maria Elisa Christie, that sometimes, you don't how should I put it? You don't plan, you don't plan everything, like a strategist, right? I think if I really recall the connection we made to do the work in Nepal, it was a very, impromptu connection that we made. And we said, okay, let's do a small research and find out, how women foresters feel about their choices and experiences in forestry. And we connected from there, we published some data, did a research and things like that, right? And then in between we connected. And then later when I moved to US, then we connected again and now I'm here, right? So sometimes I think to students, I would also say that, I mean, if my PhD has taught me one thing, it is to trust on my vibes or on my feelings, right? Because I think the more depth you go, you identify yourself more clearly. Who are you as a person? What do you want? What kind of networks and mentors you want to be associated with? What kind of people really consume your energy and you don't want to be around that? So I think why I want to say this, especially if there are students listening to this, is that don't spend too much time in over planning and being a strategist, right? Go with the flow, allow yourself the space to be you, and then through your job, through PhDs, through different new jobs and experiences that you on, discern what you like and what you don't like, right? And if you like certain networks and groups and people, be in touch, right? And you don't really have to send like 10 emails for that, but just like an occasional hello and appreciating the readings and papers. I think that's how you create very real, authentic relationship. And now I just want to reflect that because I think I and Maria Elisa Christie connected because of one thing. And now I'm here again reconnecting, I think after 10 years on this space with all of you, right? And so please take this as is the virtue or the is the feel of collaboration and the need of connecting to the right people and networks. And I think eventually that will bring you into a space where you feel more comfortable, you are supported by the mentors and peers, and they are also your go-to people when you feel like nothing is moving, there's a wall hitting and things like that, right? So I think I just wanted to flag that and also say thank you to Maria Elisa Christie for the partnership we formed and for bringing me into this space yet again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kalpana. I see that we have a new message and we still have a few minutes. So Maureen, I asked, but you didn't answer my text. Do you want to read it out loud? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. I'll give you a minute to unmute yourself if you'd like to read it yourself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read it. And the question for Maureen Agada is, what strategies have you found most effective for opening up conversations and breaking down walls with team members who may not be initially receptive to equity-focused discussions?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. What really helps is, I think, one is pick the conversation, right? So, for example, if I feel like some people are really not keen, I say, hey, can we actually talk over coffee and have a chat around that? So I think be the one who picks on the conversation, first of all, right? Don't be afraid to do that. Don't fear like resistance and, don't plan things too much, right? Don't overthink and say that I just want to go and have a chat with this person. And if the person are coming from very different sectors, like financial sectors, technical sectors, like allow yourself to also think that they might not be knowing anything about equity and the thing that you're making is not making sense to them, right? And so go with that kind of openness in your mind. So, so that always helps. So be the conversation starter, pick that conversation. Second, help them. Second, I think leave the jargons and focus on the substance, right? That's what I always say. Because in equity, like if we really talk about women's right and all that, we use the term economic empowerment of women a lot, right? But if you really go to finance people, they're like, okay, I understand economic, but what is this empowerment? This looks so difficult, right? And so, but they do talk about financial inclusion. They do targeting, and so I think the more you talk, you'll start to identify that there are certain commonalities in substance that each sector has or have. And then your job is to really identify that and bring it together. That's second. But at times, sometimes you find that some people are really not giving you the vibe of discussion and conversation, and you really don't have the patience and energy. Take a break, right? I always say, okay, let's revisit this after 2 weeks, right? And that helps hugely, right? Because I think sometimes we all have, and especially in development space, I would say people are so kind of busy with the work, and they have always some deadlines and reports and all that coming on. And sometime when we pick on this conversation, the timing needs to be right, right? And if you feel that people are not really responding, they could also be really pressed between deadlines and they really don't want to think about a new topic. So in those moments, allowing yourself and that person the space and say, let's revisit this is superly helpful. So I think be that person, and then you will find that people actually open up, and they also want to find ways to work with you. No, it's both ways. I think most of the people want to work together, but sometimes they don't really have the, I think, patience, language, and skill set to bridge that space.
That is wonderful. I love that. You know, as a director of women and gender, I have students often ask me my strategy, you know, how to be successful. And what you said first about basically following your instinct and what's important and maintaining networks, I think are, and developing and building networks are things that I always say. But patience is something that I usually put in my New Year's resolution every year. It's been many, many years. I haven't achieved it yet, but I think that's also a great strategy, and to have informal conversations with people and to realize that they don't actually understand where you're coming from. So breaking it down to you know, smaller ways of describing what you do and being patient with other people who don't understand. I think those are just wonderful strategies. I'm sure they're serving you well at the World Resources Institute. So I want to congratulate you for your wisdom. You're not that old, but you're becoming very wise. And I hope you're becoming very effective in your work there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, wiser, and I think I'm aging beautifully, I would say. But I
Well,
always feel that I think the learning of both technical and social sciences helps a lot. So I would also say, like, if you're a student or even a faculty, read a lot, right, about the other person's work as well, because like nowadays I read so much about finance, right, about this neo-colonialistic models, right? And I'm like, okay, how do I, you know, like breeze this, like this is a gray area and things like that. So I think reading helps a lot. At least it gives you some conceptual awareness of where you are landing in, and then use some of the strategies that I think I and Maria Alicia shared. Yeah, and my
Well-
team is good. I would say that in World Resource Institute, I was able to do this work because of one, people really want to do this work, but they simply didn't know how, right? So really creating that niche was very helpful. And second, there are champions who really are committed on these issues, right? So I think identifying what the champions are and mobilizing them forward as a team and putting collective efforts really made the efforts possible, basically.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your professional presentation and your personal advice. I think a lot of people on this, and not only listening today, but as I say, this will be recorded, so people will come back and listen to it again. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody who joined us today. Have a wonderful day. Hope to see you in the spring. Kalpana, I hope you will join us also for check our topics in the spring. Maybe there'll be something that's interesting to you. So thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Giri.
you. Thank you so much.